Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Battlestar Galactica Remembered. And this episode, I kind of thought long and hard. One, whether I even wanted to do this and talk about this. And the second one, if I did, well, how do we treat this? We have to treat this with the utmost of respect. And the reason why is because ultimately I decided, I think we do have to talk about this a little bit. And because it is part of the record, part of, we talk about the good and the bad about Battlestar Galactica, and this was about the as bad as you can get, where literally 2 children died because of, there was indirectly linked to Battlestar Galactica as part of the greater Battlestar Galactica story, unfortunately. And before we even begin, the 2 families still have to deal with this. They lost a loved one, even it was 40 something years ago. Their son, siblings, they still have to deal with that loss, even to this very day. And so just before we begin, I want to just say, to the families, our thoughts, our prayers, our condolences still go out to those families, because that's never going to change. It's never going to lessen their pain. They will have to live with that for the rest of their lives because it happened. And so 2 young people, right? The first one, because of the toys, and you all probably have heard of the story, right? 4-year-old Robert Jeffrey Warren out of Lilburn, Georgia. He and his older brother had just gotten the Battlestar toys, the Viper, the Cylon Raider. I had those too, for Christmas in 1978. Well, either on that day or right after, right in and around Christmas of 78, little Robert Jeffrey Warren, he shoots one of the little red missiles into his throat. It gets lodged. He goes unconscious. They take him to the hospital. Emergency surgery is done. But on December 31st, 1978, he passed away in the hospital. And, a tragic, tragic story. A little 4-year-old boy who was just playing with his toys, And so the bad thing about all that is that he wasn't the only one. By February or March, there was at least 24 other reports of serious injuries because of the toys. The Mattel Viper or Cylon Raider, they had the little firing missiles. We probably maybe had them too. I know I did. And they would get stuck in children's throats, and there was other reports, you can read about them, there's surgery, this and that, but fortunately all of those children survived their incident. But Robert Jeffrey Warren unfortunately did not. He died of asphyxiation, no oxygen to the brain ultimately. And so his parents ultimately filed a lawsuit against Mattel, and it ended up changing the entire toy industry, as we may know. No firing missiles anymore, that kind of stuff. But, the one thing, as we think about that, I remember there was a post, for example, I was reading online, and there was a post that somebody said after this story. It said that, but you know what? Even though the family went through that horrible, tragic circumstance, if something good came out of it, then that would be, something to look for, a silver lining. And with the changes of the toy industry and the non-firing missiles and all that, think of how many children were saved because of those changes. We don't know because they didn't happen, right? And that's the good news. So I would bet that there were, who knows, how many children's lives possibly were saved because of the good that came out of this horrible situation. Unfortunately for the Warrens, they lost their son, but you can look at least the good that came out of it and how many lives were saved because the toy industry changed and they didn't have the firing little missiles anymore. So that's the first one. The second one's a little different. 15-year-old Eddie Seidel Jr. out of St. Paul, Minnesota. He was a big fan of Battlestar Galactica. He heard that, of course, it had been canceled by April of 1979. He, when was that? It was Tuesday, August 21st, 1979. He worked as a stock boy at a local grocery store. He came home, went to his room, and late that night, his older sister found a note taped to his door. And the note said basically that they would find his body at the base of the high bridge in St. Paul, Minnesota. So they rushed out, whatever, and apparently reports go that early overnight on the morning of Wednesday, August 22nd, 1979, that police supposedly tried to talk him down, whatever, and that at that point, there were reports where he said that he was upset because Battlestar Galactica had been canceled. And unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in saving him. He jumped to his death. And so he was about a month away from turning 16. His parents got there right after it happened. And, we talk about the show and we love it and all that, but, there are people, like I said, especially in these situations, that, absolutely hate Battlestar Galactica. And you can understand why, because it's linked to the show. And we don't want to disrespect that. But, but we have to kind of tell the facts of what happened as best we know it. And again, these families still have to deal with this for the rest of their lives. And so, there were reports that his father said that, the young Eddie had been to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist had said he was kind of bored with life. He didn't have any challenges. And you can understand maybe why, you really get into something you like Battlestar Galactica, for example. And then when it's canceled and it's taken away from you, right, you're devastated. So you can kind of understand that. And if there were any issues, maybe mental health issues to some degree, we don't know. But it perhaps could lead to depression, maybe even suicidal thoughts. So it can happen. And so, again, just another tragic story. This one kind of indirectly, again, related to Battlestar Galactica. And it's just, again, part of the record, part of the story, the tragic part of this whole story of the show that we like and everything. But for these families, it is a real dark spot. And so I just thought, we had to cover this. I wanted to bring this to your attention. Please, again, pray for those families who, again, still have to deal with this years and years later, decades later. And it happened. But hopefully, again, parents can be watching out for signs of mental health situations, or like I said, for the toys, and watching out what your kids are playing with. I at one point, had younger kids and all that, and you always are as a parent. You've always got to be a little bit vigilant. So hopefully by understanding this and kind of seeing what happened, we can kind of look for warning signs and try to maybe prevent something like this from happening ever again. And so that's the good thing that can still come out of this, even to this day. Parents always need to be a little bit vigilant over their children and all of that, right? Try to have a healthy outlook on everything, and try to protect your kids just a little bit, right? When there are perhaps unseen dangers. So anyway, that's the story here on this one, and hope you all subscribe, like the channel, like what we're talking about here, even though sometimes it is a little bit on the negative side of things. But in any case, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.